Starting live video. Then I will turn it over to you. Here we go. Let's see if anyone's there. Give me a minute to... Is anyone out there? Give us a sign that there's life out in the universe. Sometimes it takes a couple seconds. Well, it says we're live. There we go. We've got one person tuned in. Liza. Hello, Liza. We know Liza because she keeps track of the numbers on the bus and everything. Hello, Melissa. Good. Well, I'm going to turn the phone around now and have somebody else hold it because we have a special guest here.
All right.
It's lovely.
This is Liz Gunn.
It's looking at me, not you.
It's looking at you. You're right. Hi, guys. I don't do this very often, as you'll see. Turn it around now. There, try that.
That was the most terrible face I've ever made.
It's a learning experience on We Are Vaxxed.
Life is a learning experience.
They gave me a password to get in and be an admin, and this is what happens. Well, I did get permission from Polly Tommy to do this interview because Polly also loves Liz Gunn. And whoever was listening last weekend when we were at, where were we? Te
Papa in Wellington.
Which is the museum.
Yes, the National Museum, the Museum of New Zealand, yes.
And it was a wonderful gathering, and Liz was our MC. But what you probably don't know is that Liz has a long history here in New Zealand and a little bit in Australia, from what I hear. And she's a fascinating lady, and I wanted to talk to her a little bit about journalism, really, because it's so rare to have an honest, real journalist that will do what it takes to get the truth out.
That's interesting. I really came out for lunch with Suzanne, and then I was kind of put in a corner, and I thought I was interviewing her, and then she said, no, I'm interviewing you. But in the interests of what Vaxxed is about, which to me, at the heart of it, there is the horror of these vaccine injuries that needs to be acknowledged, but the other heart of it is free speech around the world. So that's what my father was quite an activist in his way when he came back. He was in the war. He married very late, and he was, even as I was growing up, he was very much around freedom for the blacks in South Africa at a time when it was completely unfashionable. So I learned two things from that. I learned you've got to be able to speak up, and you've got to speak up fearlessly, and you have to follow your heart. If something doesn't feel right, but everybody's saying it's all okay, it's not our business, don't go into it, don't worry about it, don't ruffle feathers. But if in here it doesn't feel right, you must speak up. Otherwise, I think the people who turn away from issues that they know are there, they become complicit in it. And this is where I'm confused around the vaccine injury thing, because there must be doctors knowing there's vaccine injury in their practices, but they're turning away because it's harder to ruffle feathers. That will be a hard one for them to live with.
Well, it's definitely hard for everyone to ruffle feathers because there are consequences. But let's go back a little bit in time, since I'm interviewing you and turning the tables around on you. So what you don't know maybe is that Liz started out in law school, right? You went to law school. So why did you go to law school?
I loved words at school, and I loved the concept of justice.
Okay.
I love the idea of justice, and I was an inveterate little optimist as a child. Life's tried its best to knock it out of me, and at times it's come close, but I always believed that if you could use your words to tell the truth, then you're going to be able to achieve lots in this life. It doesn't always happen, does it, Suzanne? No.
So what kind of law did you aspire to specialize in?
Yeah, long term I thought that I might get into criminal law and act for people who needed a voice, because I was aware that the whole justice system depends on two sides. You need people to advocate for the people who are struggling often with laws that can be unjust, and they need a voice. And you also need to test the other side if they're going to be prosecuted, because otherwise the prosecution can get away with it. The law depends on two strong sides. You have to have a strong defense and a strong prosecution. And I thought that initially I would do some inner city law work, and then I would possibly move into representing people. I think I was always motivated by trying to understand social justice issues. But during those 2.5 years that I was doing inner city law work in a large firm, I came to feel that law was a very demanding and uneven mistress. A demanding mistress in that the law always demands every bit of your time and then some. So when you go back to practice after you've been in court, there's always a big pile of things to go. You never have a sense of completion. And I found that quite hard. And I also found that sometimes when I was in court, there were people who could afford very good defences, and there were other people who clearly didn't deserve to be there but needed a good defence, and they were going to get done, and the rich ones who could afford the good defence were going to get off.
That's right.
And I started to feel law may not be about justice, it may be about who can pay for justice. So at that point I went to a partner of mine who I love dearly to this day, and I said, I'm not sure if law's for me, I'm struggling with some aspects of it. And he said, what would you do if you had cancer and you were going to die in 6 months? And I said, studied. I was
Very
to study
good question, right? Always,
one.
every day we should ask ourselves that.
It's true. It's true. And I said, I'd love to study. And I ended up studying in Paris and living with a family and studying for the joy of study and got a different perspective on life.
Wait, so what did you study after that person asked you that? Because you were already an attorney when they asked you that?
Yes, yeah. He was great. He said, go and do that. Go and study overseas. Study for joy again. I studied.
Joy, okay.
Yes, I studied for joy. I studied because I have some crazy theories. I think we should all study the arts and we should know the humanities. We should study history, because if it isn't so orientated towards just making a living, what happens in the human mind is we open up to new concepts and our brains question more, and we've become more fascinated by fascinating human beings.
Absolutely.
And fascinating human beings, the ones who stand out in history, are the ones who've been mavericks, who've stood out and not been part of the crowd. So I went and studied that in Paris, and people said, well, how does this help your law degree? And I went, your law career? And I went, not sure, but boy, I'm loving studying again. And I'm loving learning, and I think that's been a lifelong thing. So then I came back and I taught law, and then I worked for the Law Society in a very administrative role. And then I thought, I think I can use this in the media. I think I can use these skills swapping over to a media role, because you have to be able to organise information quickly, be articulate, be able to communicate ideas, be able to get to the heart of the issues quite quickly in both law and media. And so I thought about it for about 3 months, and then a job opened up.
A media job.
A media job.
Okay.
And I've often wondered how I did that. I think it goes to quantum physics, where I used to watch. We went to South Africa for about 3 months, and I used to watch. It was an American interviewer who was on CNN, the guy with the braces, and he was slouched forward like this. The older guy. His name will come to me. Larry King.
Oh, okay.
So there was often a shot over his shoulders. If you ever want to get into media, this is how I think I did it. And I used to picture that instead of him sitting there, it was me sitting there asking questions. And then maybe in the quantum field, when you picture yourself in something, opportunities open up. I don't quite know how that opportunity opened up, but I auditioned for something. I got down to the last 2 and missed out to a Pacific Island woman who was very talented. And the guy who was auditioning me came and said, you've got something, I'm going to put you on your own show and train you up. And that was just a midday arts show. But that was how the door opened into another career.
Here in New Zealand?
Here in New Zealand.
What was the name of that show?
It was Sunday.
Sunday. So people here know Sunday?
No, it's gone now. No,
but there's a history here of Sunday. I've heard... No?
Really? No, I don't think so, because it was about 20-something years ago.
You know, in the USA, there's a show called Sunday Morning. That's what it was.
That is. But no, they very quickly got rid of the arts, and the TV was starting to shut down those beautiful openings. But I moved around into different forms of television, and had a period of news, and again, interested in the way news is shaped.
Right. Now, I remember reading something about... There was an issue where you had, just before you were going on air, you learned about something called editorial advertising, advertorials.
Yes.
And the boss of the station came up to you and said, Liz, if you're unhappy with this and you don't want to do it, if you leave today, you'll never work in the industry again. And I thought to myself, that is so wrong for someone to assume that they have control of the whole industry if you don't behave. So how did that land on you when she said that to you?
That's interesting. Yeah, I did a mid-morning show, and as I was going to to the live on-air debut of it. I was told that there were live editorials in it,
And why did you have trouble with that anyway?
Because I hadn't been treated respectfully and told what was happening.
Okay.
B, I didn't want that to be woven into the show. I'm not big on using media to just push products at people, and I felt that there weren't many of them around in those days, and I thought it was going to subvert a show that I suppose the reason is a show that I very much wanted to honour my audience. This Māori concept of manaakitanga, which is one of the most beautiful words I think in the Māori language, and it's an idea of you always treat any visitor or anybody you're talking to with greatest respect. As an aside, I have great problems with Lance O'Sullivan having, invaded a screening of Vaxxed. He's very strong on his Māori side, and yet he didn't show any manaakitanga for the people who had invited him to that screening, for the people who wanted a serious discussion, who wanted to be able to open up all avenues of perspectives on that. That was the opposite of manaakitanga, coming and doing a haka and bullying people. So manaakitanga is you honour and you treat with respect their views, and that's what I wanted to do in that show. So yeah, it was it was the truth. It was actually the floor manager who said that to me, you'll never work in TV again. And I had to decide within that 5-minute framework. But the idea of that is woven right through media, that I, to a certain extent, if I don't play the game, I may not get the work that I want. And that deeply compromises what we need in a democracy. Every democracy needs free speech.
Right.
So what I would love is some politician to come forward and say, I'm going to fund a television channel where views can be put out and discussion can be open and the intelligent audience can decide themselves where you come down on any issue, including vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're doing, Suzanne. You're presenting evidence. That's what Polly's doing.
Yes. And we've all been, stomped on various steps of the way, and people trying to shut us down as we go. And I've noticed, turning it back to you again, that as you were going through, you went into the media, and it seems like, from what I understand, pretty much every step of the way there was that person there that was trying to rough you up in one way or the other. And there was one guy in particular, and I don't know if you want to talk about this. Are we allowed to talk about this at all?
I'm
okay.
Free
so there was
speech.
a guy named Hoskings.
Yeah.
And you had problems with him. And what makes Liz famous, and I couldn't find a clip of this, but she quit on air. She had enough one day, and she said she used to go in and actually go in before everybody else into the station and sit in silence and pray that she could maintain her integrity in the face of the bullying and intimidation that was happening on air and behind the scenes. So, but you just one day decided did you know beforehand that you were okay? Answer the first question first. We'll get to the next question.
He was an interesting one.
Yeah.
He was somebody who seemed to have the equal and opposite values that I have. So where I really value people. I passionately value people, and I deeply care for those who suffer. Perhaps because I have personally, and I think we all have. And I used to think, has he ever allowed himself to feel pain? And I like to psychoanalyze. Perhaps he's got such a deep something going on there from his childhood. I don't know. It's something very, very deeply, but on the surface is a sort of sometimes on those programs when someone would come in who was struggling, or I remember him talking about a family member, and he'd just say, oh, he's a loser. He's a complete loser. Or the idea that news stories were very ephemeral and didn't have any kind of personal traction with them. And the best example of that was the year we were on. It was 9/11 at the end of the first week after that horrific week. And we're all going, this changes the world. What is going on? You picked up the thing in one break and, I'm over this story. The idea of news as simply something you're doing as a job to just get through, that the stories don't touch you as long as your family, your money, your life, your immediate needs
your
are met.
island.
Your island. It is very much an island or a rock. It was hard. And there were other things that went on behind the scenes that were pretty horrific quite early on in that year. He and two of the producers really tried to I felt like I was being stoned in one, not in a good way, so literally stoned, metaphorically, verbally stoned with trying to throw me off. There is a part of me that is a very powerful woman, and it's taken me a lot of my lifetime to find her, but she was there. And even though I was quite broken at the beginning of that experience and doubting myself, and they were playing on it, that beautiful female voice that roars in all of us, and every woman who's ever stood up for her child has that voice. That voice was there. And I remember standing my ground in that particular meeting, and one of the producers, after ringing me and saying, "Oh, I thought Mike was terrible," I thought, "Oh, totally," and I felt like saying, "Why weren't you with me there?" But these experiences, those things that don't break us, do end up making us more connected to ourselves. Someone once said to me, for a diamond to shine, it has to be tossed with a lot of very rough stones. And it's true, we have to have these experiences. So what I decided was, I went to my boss actually, and I said, I would like to announce that I'm leaving. I've done this year. I've done out the year. I wasn't going to give in to the bullying. I won't give in to bullies. And I said, I'd like to announce that I'm leaving. So he honoured me and didn't tell anybody. So in the very last section of the last program, the producer said, "Oh, you have to do the Christmas promotion." I said, "Can I come back to you on that?" And we came back on air, and I said, it's been an interesting year. And I thanked the lovely woman Helen on the auto cue, and I thanked the director, and I acknowledged Mike. I didn't thank him because I couldn't. And I survived it, and I walked out of there with dignity, and I haven't spoken to him since, I don't think. But there have been other women he's tried to do this too, and I am just sad for him that he can't use his 3 media platforms in New Zealand for something that really does help the greater good. I would really, beyond the personal, and I don't even hold a grudge, I feel more sorry for him, but beyond that, he has such an incredible media presence, whether he's liked or not. He could use it for so much more than he does, which is basically to push one governmental line and to push the neoliberal philosophy and to push that greed is good and to push that we should all just be, anybody who makes it, they're good, anyone who doesn't make it or is struggling, they're useless. You know, we are all in this society. We are no better than the least of us. We are all much better people when we help those who are struggling. There's no doubt in my mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you can sleep with yourself at night now, and now there's someone like him, and there's someone like Lance, and we have counterparts in America, and they seem to be, you know, just hurting people and being really calloused and having such disregard, and they keep getting elevated, and they maintain their positions, and they get bigger and more famous and more money and more of everything they've always strived for. And then there's people like us who do what we know is right in our hearts, and we keep getting punished for it. So my question to you is, for any aspiring journalists out there, I mean, people ask me this all the time as a medical doctor. So how would you talk to aspiring journalists out there, knowing that fake news is really where it's all at today? That's where the money is being made. Honesty, like you, doors have closed, obviously, for you, but you're still here. You're still doing work. Tell us what you're doing and how you got yourself to say, I don't care how many doors closed, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to figure it out.
That is such a good question. That's for every human being. That question. You need to sit with just what Suzanne's asked. So I went through a few years of very deep depression, which I think are really, they're valuable years. I wouldn't be without those years. I lost my marriage, but through all of that, I was a fearless and fearfully loving mother. You know, fearfully in that I was a mother tiger. I was going to bring those children through, and I was going to bring good human beings into this world with good values. And I've done that, and I've loved them ferociously, and I always will. So that was my quiet triumph. I also decided to delve into the sorts of paradigms that happen early in our lives, because I do believe that Bruce Lipton, who I've interviewed for a show called The Global Health Show, he was saying that the first 7 years of our lives shape us. And so if we've had any bullying often in those first 7 years, we'll meet it again further along. So I think it behoves us to look at what's shaped us. I think it helps us to have a very deep faith, whatever form that takes. It doesn't matter if you believe in the flowers and the sun and, you know, Mother Earth or a God or a number of gods. I don't care. I'm not judging anybody else. I have my own very deep personal faith, and I know that there is a a purpose for us here, and that this lifetime we can use for something bigger. So with all of those factors, get to know yourself a bit, find out what's shaped you, try to unravel some of the knots within that. And then those values, what are my values? Am I here just to collect things and have a bigger car? Mike has the Maserati. Does it ever bring him happiness? I very much doubt it. It might on a superficial level, but when he's dying, I think he'll go, oh my God, it wasn't about the car. It wasn't about the big house in Remuera. So if that isn't what you're after, just the material wealth, what's sold to us, what are you wanting in this life? And for me, it is just that person to person, touching a life and having the courage to go within and find the truth that I feel about something and stand for that. Not be intimidated, not be put off by those people who try to be authority figures. Lance O'Sullivan, to me, feels like a very authoritarian 1950s kind of father figure, saying, this is what you will believe, and these are the only views that you can hold, and I know what is right. But I would never have brought my children up like that. They wouldn't really love me or respect me, because I wouldn't have loved and respected them. He might mean well in his way, but I think he needs to step back and go, is that love? Is that respect? Is that manakitanga? Or am I treating people in society as if they're less than me, not as intelligent as me, not able to work things out, therefore I can talk down to them? Anything coming from that arrogance, that id, that ego, is never going to hold. The only thing that holds over time is those who've loved. And I think what you've done and what Polly's done is an act of the most incredible love. And Hilary Butler here in New Zealand. I mean, the love to serve, the love to speak the truth. And I don't think I'm doing anything particularly marvelous at all, but I have in my heart that I will always stand for what I believe in, and I will serve wherever I can, and I will do what I can that's my little bit. And with the Vaxxed team, it was, what on earth is going on with this suppression of free speech? Why were you not given a slot? This highly articulate, highly educated, fascinating book to read, by the way, that you've written, fascinating author. Why were you not given a slot on Kim Hill's show on 9 to Noon on national radio? Leading. I mean, that is a really good question, because Kim is meant to stand for kind of the last stand for democracy, for free speech.
They've all been warned. They've all been told, you'll never work in the industry again if you have an anti-vaccine doctor on. You're only allowed to have anti-vaccine moms on with a pro-vaccine doctor. That's pretty much the ethos.
That is frightening. That is a frightening idea. That is a frightening concept. What that means is huge tracts of very valuable information for intelligent adults to make their own minds up. Huge tracts of that information are being censored out.
Absolutely.
And it also means that the journalists are being manipulated by fear and by self-interest. So getting back to your question, and this is the answer, if you're going to be a journalist, be a fearless one, be a brave one. What I've found out over the time, my father had a saying that when I was in the media, remember this, today a rooster, tomorrow a feather duster. Nobody will remember you. And I've often been fascinated when people stop me or remember me. And it's not an egoic thing. I think, how can that be? Because I haven't been in it for 10 years or so. And I think they don't remember me per se. It's the flavour of somebody who would speak her truth and who would stick to her truth, even if she was paying a price for it. And that's the journalist to be. And it doesn't matter, the worldly successes will come and go like the waves, but inside you have something that nothing can take away. No insults from Lance O'Sullivan or anybody else, Mike Hoskings, any of them can wash that away.
And what I found is that there is a huge population out there that is so thirsty for what you have to say and what I have to say, because those people want representation and they want a voice.
Yeah.
Now, the real problem is getting the media outlet. So what have you done as far as getting media outlets to do your reporting? So
what I've been doing is quietly working with a blog site, and I work with a funny little TV channel that's a sort of a Sky TV one. So it's a paid per view one, but he's still quite interested in things that are not necessarily mainstream. He wants to be a change maker on that. The biggest forum for me at the moment is still online, and I think there is a terrific person-to-person ability we have to talk across these corporate-driven medias. But I still think there needs to be a very much a free-to-air, brave, courageous, fully funded TV channel. It can be a centralized hub where fearless journalists come to work.
Definitely.
So what am I doing about that? I plan to talk to some high net worths about that and see if there's anybody brave enough to put some money up for that. That would be terrific. It's not going to happen before this election, but we're having an election in about 4 weeks. But I think that there is a prospect that is very tantalizing there, where we could have you visit again and tell truth. And nobody can take that down. No pressure at the corporate governmental level can be brought to bear on that. That's a dream. Yeah.
So where can people find you? Where you're writing now? You're doing writing journalism. So where can they find you?
I do some writing. If they Facebook me on Liz Gunn.
Gunn.
Yes, and you can also look at a Facebook page called Ask Why. We're doing that on poverty at the moment. But I'm focusing a lot on the poverty situation at the moment. There's another blog I write for called 13th Floor, 13, that's named after an obscure 60s band, 13th Floor. But I'm quietly doing my sort of rebuilding part of my life after a pretty rugged period. And loving it, and loving it. And
absolutely.
There is a fearlessness that comes with it. I love being an older woman. I think it's amazing. I'm glad. I would never be in my 20s again. Do you love it? I don't understand anyone who fears getting old.
I'm not loving the physical aspect of aging, but I am loving the mental and emotional aspect of aging.
I think physically we get better.
Well, you've gotten much better looking with age. I was looking at like you were gorgeous then, but now she's like a total knockout. I don't know how some women do to get better looking with age.
Do you know what it is? You just believe.
It's
I get
true.
better with
It's
age.
true.
I'm a fine wine.
Yeah.
I'm a fine wine.
Yeah,
In every
it's
way,
true.
I'm a fine wine. We've all got amazing things, and I used to joke that I would do my best work in my 60s, 70s and 80s.
Oh.
And I'm starting to
The
think,
best is yet to come.
I don't think that was a joke.
No.
I used to joke about it, but I think that's what a lot of us will start to be, especially we boomers.
So Liz, would you like to ask Suzanne some questions?
I'd love to ask some questions. That book, what was the genesis for that book, Rising from the Dead? Because it's one of the most moving books I have come across, and it's such a strange mixture of, it's not a campaigning book, and it's not just a straight biography, but you've really woven something that pulls you in to the human being. I read it before I met you, and I sort of fell in love with you then. It's a powerful book. It's a powerful book.
Yeah. Well, after writing the book, I can say that I'm pretty sure we all have a book in us, at least one book. And I'm pretty sure it's really interesting depending on how you write it. So I really wrote the book because as a medical doctor who was packing up to leave my conventional job, I had been through quite a bit before I actually had that last day. And there was a lot of, I'm not going to call it like intentional intimidation, but what there was a lot of resistance. Okay, so pretty much everything I said that was, putting a PMID number paper in front of somebody and saying, will you just please read this? There was resistance and even if they did read it, there was more resistance. And I thought to myself, wow, if this is what and once in a while, they would actually have me wondering, am I wrong here? Am I barking up the wrong tree? Having me start to doubt myself, even though intellectually I knew I was 100% correct in what I had seen and what I had researched. And then I thought, if this is what can happen to me, someone who with a bachelor's degree in physics, who's had 2 years of doing research in a pretty high-powered laboratory, and then went to medical school, and then became a professor of medicine, and then has been in practice for 14 years, what must it be like for a parent to go into that office and deal with these people? And so the real reason for the book was to let parents know what really goes on the inside, to let parents know the emperor is stark naked. And that these doctors, I have a friend that keeps saying to me, you're a doctor, you should know that. And I say to her, you so totally overestimate what doctors are all about. And I was one of the top, I'm not Harvard trained, but I've done quite well in my exams. It's not that I don't know things because I'm a dummy. I didn't know things because I was trained in that system. And just like probably you experience with law, you go through medical school, what they found is that people who graduate high school at the top, they don't actually go on to be inventors and to be world changers. They go on to be, they make a lot of money, and they stay in these kind of one-track jobs.
And there's a conformity to it.
Very much conformity. Yes. And so in order to go to medical school, you really, most people are that way, is that they're very bright, they can pass tests, They can memorize a whole lot of information, and they're very interested in obeying and getting approval. And what's the answer for the exam? What's the next exam that I have to pass? Show me the answers that I need to know in order to pass that exam, because that's what's most important to me, is keeping my credentials. It's not, when you went to Paris and studied art, I think that there's a value in that for all of us, because when we expand, it teaches us not just to think, but to think more deeply and to start thinking on our own and connecting dots. And I started to do that even on my own within the system. And then since I've left the system, a whole new world has opened up to me, where I can say that I'm a far more competent doctor today than I was 8 years ago when I left, that I am far more deeper thinker, yes, that I know far more about what real physiology and real health is. And so I wanted to bring that to parents in this book, like what my journey has been. So I start people from high school, actually,
yes,
which in America is like age 18, about graduating around age 18. And then my first job, and what university was like, and all through medical school, and the crazy stuff that goes on behind the scenes in medical school, things you would never believe people allowed to happen. That even in my innocence in that time, I would just stand there going, but how can you let that happen? Why isn't anybody saying anything? And
give us an example of that, because there are some wonderful examples in the book. There are some.
Well, the most vivid one I have is standing in an operating room, and there were probably 4 of us around this open body cavity.
Is this the powder?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And the surgeon, very great. I love the surgeon. He was an incredibly skilled surgeon, very arrogant. He was a 4th-year resident. He pricked his finger, and he just goes, "Oh shit!" And I'm like, I didn't know what happened, because I didn't see it, because the surgical needles are curved. You can't really see what's going on in there. And the nurses knew immediately, so they just started getting him out a new pair of gloves. And as the body cavity was a total abdominal opening, was there with the light shining on it, he just takes off his rubber gloves, latex gloves, and there's all this powder inside, and I just see powder like going up into the air, caught in the light, and then falling into the abdomen. And I just stood there and like thought out loud, and I just said, "There's powder going into the abdomen." And everybody just ignored me. Now that was powder that would have been sweating against his hands with staph and strep and everything that lived on, even though his hands were scrubbed. Plus the powder, we double layer gloves, so he would have 2 layers of gloves on. And the powder just went right in there. And it was later that I learned that talcum powder is actually used to create adhesions in the lung. If you have a lung that keeps collapsing, that it's used for that. And so the chances are that this person was going to have huge problems with abdominal adhesions later on, and nobody would know. They would just say, "Oh, it's because you had an operation," not because the surgeon took his gloves off and let all his talc fall into the abdomen.
And the point of that story when I was reading it is, it's not that the doctor is, doctors are doing valid jobs. You're not decrying that. It's that there is an arrogance that comes with runaway human ego. There is a terrible danger when we don't have situations in life that humble us. And the arrogance of what he did, I think, was as worrying as the
complicity in everyone around him.
And everybody's staying silent because he's God.
He's staying in the sterile field, and his injury was more important than what happened with that patient.
Yeah. And there are many stories like that. The book is incredible because you start off as this researcher, and you're looking at medical students thinking, they must be so intelligent, and so I can't ever picture myself doing that. And then you started working with a couple, and you went, there are quite a few questions that they don't seem to understand at all. Maybe I can go to medical school. And then this slow opening, which I've also experienced from being a high achiever and wanting to excel and wanting to fit in and being the good student as well. And then I see this opening in the book where you start to question internally and then externally, and you get decried for that, derided for that, dismissed actually a lot, weren't they, your questions? Yeah. And then you just become more and more powerful in your own presence. With that though, Suzanne, the downside has been great cost to you in some ways of having to weather insults and wrong accusations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly came with the territory. There are people, some of them are just strong believers in vaccination, and some of them, I believe, are paid people that are, basically hired to try to dismiss, humiliate, discredit people like me. That doesn't really bother me at all, honestly. So for me, the ability to bring to parents the reality and let them choose for themselves if they want to vaccinate or not. Let them try to discover for themselves what builds a true immune system and true health. That makes everything else just feel like it's nothing. It really doesn't bother me.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And you have that every day of your life when you're at home practicing. You're working with parents who are... Can you give me some of those stories where you see somebody who isn't confident, who's perhaps not known where to turn, and you see that mother's confidence or father's confidence start to blossom?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's, one of the things that I think Rising from the Dead does is it gives parents that aspect. But I've had numerous people, all over the world, because I do Skype consults as well. So it's usually just for information. And I've had parents say, I'm about to go get my child vaccinated tomorrow, but I just have had a few questions. And I would say, well, why don't you just put it on hold for another week or two, and, we can talk. And I never tell somebody not to vaccinate. I want that to be very clear. I've never once told somebody not to vaccinate. But what I've done is, and this is the part that does bother me.
I want to underline that you don't do that. You don't tell people. What you say is, I will put out all the information that I can share across the board.
Right.
And you can read all the information online and balance it with what I can offer you. Yes.
So if you want to know what really bothers me, it's not the insults. It's the fact that this reality that there are, two potential paths to go on, and probably lots in between. And if I portray that to parents, I'm all of a sudden, thought of as a criminal within the medical system. That's what bothers me, because there is so much medical literature, so much information, so much hardcore science showing the vulnerabilities and the inaccuracies of our current vaccine paradigm that I think parents have a right to know. And I am vilified for showing that to them, because in America there's been this ethos since the 1980s that any doubts, whether well-founded or not, as to the safety of the vaccination is not allowed to exist. This was actually printed and given to all doctors in America in 1984. That's what bothers me. So I've had so many parents come to me, and I get letters all the time thanking me, and people say, don't you love being famous? Don't you love this? I'm like, no, I don't love being famous. In fact, it's a real pain in the ass, quite frankly. But what I really do love is when somebody says to me, look at my beautiful child, look at how healthy my child is. I came this close and I didn't feel good about it because I knew in my gut. And that's part of Rising from the Dead, is parents know this. And all I did was validate what they already know. And so they went and they did the research because they knew they could do the research. And then they came to their own answer that in their own gut, they knew they were doing the right thing. That's what makes me feel good.
It's so powerful.
Whether they vaccinate or not, quite frankly, but most of them do choose not to when they go and read the reality of what the vaccines are all about and the diseases.
There's a terrific idea that the more intelligent a person is, the more they realize that what they don't know. So life is about this constant unfolding of knowledge. And the arrogance of saying it's settled science, that everything is known about this, it's counter to everything you see around you in nature. Nature's constantly, the koru is always unfolding, that life is always opening up to new possibilities. It makes no sense. And Polly said it last week at Te Papa. The science, this idea that the science is settled, is not the truth.
No.
There is so much yet to go. Where would you love to see it taken if you had an ideal world, Suzanne? What would you love to begin with, this possibility of open discussion in media so that more people can self-educate, more people can question?
I mean, that's one of the first things that has to be released, because that's how we're all kept in this kind of prison, this intellectual prison right now. And so that's a must, that people have to understand what their options are. So that goes without saying.
And that's going to take brave journalists who will break with their superiors and say this needs to be discussed.
And it's probably in between that happening, I think, Anu talks about this a lot, where social media is really taken over as many of our source to go to. Mm-hmm. And the television news is now, most of us are onto it, that there's a major problem. I don't even turn on the television anymore. So there's going to be this massive, exodus from the mainstream over to where we are right now, and people are going to start learning. And then the question is, what are they going to do about that? Google, we've got to get out of Google. So I want to say
that we've got to get out of Google.
Well, Google is pretty much bought at this point, and it's only going to get worse. They're already working with medical doctors at I believe it's the Cleveland Clinic or Mayo Clinic. I can't remember which one. The doctors are now being hired to decide, in the search engines, what should come up first when somebody Googles something about a vaccine. And you can notice that if you go to a different search engine and put in the same thing, different items will come up, and you can get, I forget what the better ones are. It's eluding me right now, but I have my computer set to it, so I pretty much don't use Google anymore for that reason. So
I want to cut in here. The problem with all of this is that big pharmaceutical is often behind this.
Yeah.
And big pharmaceutical is so severely compromised in offering any advice.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is they make billions and billions of dollars out of these vaccines.
Right.
So we've got this circle where they're the advisors, they're the gatekeepers.
Judge, jury, prosecution.
And they're making so much money through all of this. So we have to question this. My goodness. So we've got this possibility online. So how do we manage that?
Well, what I want people to understand is that, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we saw a lot of death from these diseases that we vaccinate for today. But we live in an era today where we can truly have it all. We have a competent medical system. When it's working well, it's fantastic. I prescribe 1 or 2 antibiotics per year. I'll admit to that. When there's trauma, I send someone to a doctor. When I want something checked out in a hospital, I'll send them for a scan. I love the medical system for those things. We have that access there that wasn't there 100 and 200 years ago. We have this technology. We have drugs that can kill microbes that we couldn't kill before the 1940s. So we have that as a backup. Now we have all this knowledge about how the immune system really works. Do you know when they started inventing vaccines, they didn't even know what a white blood cell was? They knew nothing. We're still learning about the immune system. Settled science, forget about it. There's no settled science because we're still learning about the immune system and how wrong we've been.
Yes.
So, given that that's all evolving in our minds. Now, science is what it is. It's creation, okay? All we're doing is we're little brains trying to understand it and conceptualize it and teach it to each other. But that's all there. So we're understanding physiology better. We know what supplements. We know what, you were talking about water today, and minerals and live water and how important that is. If people just get the basics down, they can be, and then they serve as examples to each other. You see, look at a family who's doing everything according to the blueprint, or most things even, because the blueprint does have, plan B and plan C in it. So you can mess up here and there.
Well, it's that blueprint is breastfeed if you can, as long as you can. That will
and
help
even if
your
you
baby.
don't, like I'm not breastfed, but I'm ridiculously healthy because my mother did other things that were really right throughout my life. I was well nourished, at least in my later years. And as a child, I was not, but I was loved, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that I was loved, I was protected, I had clean water, I had a safe place to sleep, I was not having child labor. I went to a school that was good enough.
If you were sick, you were kept home in bed?
If I was sick, I was doted on, and I was very well cared for. So it's like, we're very resilient human beings, but when you start in pregnancy with the drugs and the scans and the vaccines and the terror, and your baby could die, and then when they're born with the vaccines and more antibiotics and more vaccines, I didn't get any of that. It's more what I didn't have than what I did have growing up. And these kids today, it's really amazing testament to the human constitution, what they're surviving, the ones that do survive intact. But we can have it without all those drugs and those vaccines. And the fewer vaccines you give, the fewer drugs you need.
That's such an interesting one, because at Te Papa we had the White Hearts with the stories of children who have not been vaccinated. There were things like no ear infections. And on the other side in the Black Hearts,
it's kind of inconceivable at first, isn't it? When I first saw unvaccinated kids, I thought, wait a minute, you've never had an antibiotic in your life, get out of here. And then there was the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And that's pretty much the majority of the unvaccinated childhood population.
And if anybody doubts that, one of the biggest things that the Vax team are pushing for is this comprehensive study of vaxxed children versus unvaccinated children. That to me, when I first read it, seemed it's such a logical place to start for medical scientific investigation, isn't it?
And within families. I mean, that's what Polly's doing, is she's bringing one family in that's got like 4 kids or more. And it was brilliant in Utah, because people in Utah, the Mormons, have a lot of babies. So we have all these families, these parents that are really angry because of what happened to their first kid, their second kid, their third kid. And then they finally figured it out. And then they bring in the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, up to the 12th. And they're ridiculously healthy. It's the consistent coincidence. So what more evidence do you need? We have understanding. We have availability of supplements in most countries. We have a good medical system. Enough with the fear already. Enough with letting the pharmaceutical company, run our country, basically.
And the doctors. And that's where in New Zealand, I think Lance O'Sullivan does need to respect that mothers will not be silenced. There's this beautiful maternal roar starting to happen. I had it personally after I had a very bad birth with my first child, and a doctor told me, don't go and see an osteopath, you've just got a bad-tempered baby. And I went, why would did you tell me this little angel is bad-tempered? I could have disliked that child on that basis of that wrong information. Mm-hmm. And this maternal roar came up in me, and I went, I will find ways to make her well. And from that moment, I took responsibility. I was responsible as the mother. I could get advice from different people, but they would only be able to give me advice, never dictate to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a powerful place for all mothers to go to. But this roar won't be silenced now, will it, Suzanne? It's really building.
In fact, what I find is that someone who tries to tell that roaring mother that her baby could die, or that this vaccine might be the good thing, or that polio did this, that actually makes them roar even louder. So, and they're really freaking out because their information, their science, saying that scientific parents have cognitive dissonance. I mean, they're really running out of excuses, and that's why mandates are happening. That's why mandates are going to be attempted in every country of the world, because they know that people are understanding better. They know that their supposed settled science isn't convincing them because it doesn't make sense. And when they hear what you and I are saying, that bell of truth goes off in their heads, and they go, aha, I know that's right. Every cell in my body just lined up when I heard that, because I know it's the truth. You can't unring a bell. You know that as an attorney.
Absolutely. So the mandates. How do you feel about Italy? They're saying France in 2018. Australia, look at the doctrinaire approach in Australia. Where do we go with that, Suzanne?
Well, I feel really happy to know that the Italians are still protesting. I was yesterday watching Dr. Andrew Wakefield and his cinematographer talking about what's happening in Italy. And that's on We Are Vaxxed, if you want to go listen. That was a wonderful interview with Francesca Alessi. Sorry, Francesca, it took me a second to remember your name. And she was outlining what was going on there. And she said they're still protesting. There's still people in the streets. They're not giving up. And in addition to that, they have a plan. And so they outlined what the plan is. They're not just going to lay down. Because I said if Italy lays down and goes with this, we're all done for. Italy has not laid down. They're not going to. So Italy, we're behind you.
They chose the wrong country. The Italian heart.
Exactly.
The Italian mama. The Italian mother is not going to give up on this.
There were Italian doctors that have been writing brilliant medical articles about the problems with vaccination. One of the first articles that came out showing that the mutant strains of pertussis were happening in vaccinated populations, but not in unvaccinated populations, was Italian, Master Antonio. So a lot of doctors in Italy, and unfortunately because of the language barrier, I don't follow all of them, but I know they're there, and I know they've been speaking the truth. And so it's not just parents, it's even doctors, and they stand to risk their careers far more than I do as an American doctor. So I'm encouraged by what's continuing to happen in Italy, and none of us are going to lie down and die. And let this be a word of warning and hope, because we should be hopeful, because we're still here, we still have our lives, we still have our power, we don't have mandatory vaccines yet. Don't give up, but don't rest on your laurels and think that this is going to be taken care of for you. This is a critical moment in human history where people have to get up, whether you like vaccines or not. If you don't want to be mandated from cradle to grave, get your butt off the couch and go do something. Start talking to people. Learn the facts before you start talking. Otherwise, they will eat your lunch and pop the bag. So learn the facts and start talking about it. Otherwise, we're done for. And we have to continue to fight. So I'm hopeful, but I'm still rallying the troops because we need them.
Would you ever get into politics? Because that's the thing, the political influence of Big Pharma. It's the politicians kowtowing to Big Pharma influence that is bringing in these mandated laws. That is not what the populace wants. So would somebody like you ever think of it?
If you asked me this a year ago, I would have said, heck no. But today I watch as, Merck is looking to put people into office, just small offices within states. And I think, if somebody wants to help me run for an office somewhere in America, I would do it in 5 seconds. I think it would be really fun, actually.
Wow. If there's any philanthropist who's into free speech and into a highly intelligent female energy, and also is knowing that vaccines are not right for our future generations and wants at least the information to be put out there, you know who to fund. That would be phenomenal.
But fortunately, the state where I live, we have wonderful politicians. They voted 10 out of 10 not to touch our religious vaccine exemption, not to touch it, not to alter it, not to do anything to it. We still have honest politicians in Virginia. But I know that there are plans to put, the one woman in particular that did a horrible testimony, which is why I know it would be fun for me, because I would be eating their lunch and popping their bag. The pharmaceutical industry is perching to put her into office in Virginia.
What do you mean, a horrible testimony? Just explain that.
She basically brought a mother And she talked about how vaccines, they have the same old line, vaccines are the most wonderful, contribution to longevity that medicine has ever created. The smallpox vaccine eradicated smallpox. We don't have polio anymore. So she went to that whole spiel. And then she said, and here, I want you to listen to this mother and her testimony. This mother comes up and says, well, the year that we had measles coming through, we had a few cases of measles. She said, I had a little newborn baby and I was terrified and I stayed home. And we're sitting here going, yeah. And did the baby get measles? She's like, my baby didn't get measles, but I was so scared. That's the best they've got, is a mother who was scared
by their false information
over a few cases of measles in the state because she was scared that we're supposed to all, now say, well, we need to mandate all these vaccines.
And this is a crucial part for mothers, the fear. As soon as I sense fear now, I go, do I want fear or do I want freedom? Fear and freedom can never live side by side within you. There's a choice you have to make. And if you want to eschew fear, then you get the freedom, but it takes some courage. I will be the arbiter of what goes into my children. I will be the one who decides on the basis of educating myself. And I will stand up to people who try to make me feel scared. It's a horrible way to rule people. Suzanne, I think it's terrific if you're going to stand for politics.
Well, I didn't say I was... Liz, you're getting me in trouble. It's time to end this broadcast, I think. It's gone on far too long.
It's a lovely
We'll be editing that little bit out.
Lovely to talk to you. And I think that's perhaps the final note I'd like to say is that old potato of people saying, but vaccines have helped us get rid of these diseases. What is new information telling us about the passage of those diseases? Sometimes the vaccines were brought in as they were fading off, because this is something that's thrown up so much as the reason to keep going.
Well, there's always a grain of truth in what these pro-vaccine people say. And so I will give them that. However, I'm a big picture person. Because I'm looking at humanity, and I'm looking at humanity going down the tubes. I'm looking at when I look at kidney problems in children, more than ever we're seeing today. More diabetes than we've ever seen, more allergies, more anaphylaxis, more epilepsy, more special education. Something's wrong here. Let's back up and look at the big picture. And an area of interest to me now that I'm going to be presenting publicly in the end of the year and the beginning of next year is this idea. It's not an idea, it's a reality. Let me just say that it's a reality. It's a cold, hard, provable fact that you can be very successful and you can make a vaccine and you can eradicate or significantly decrease the carriage of a particular microbe. But what's going to happen is that the plan with these microbes is pretty good, and you can't necessarily improve upon it by mass vaccinating. What happens is you can put a pneumococcal vaccine into a child, and you can get rid of those 7 strains, or you can get rid of those 13 strains, but other strains of pneumococcus are going to move in around that, and they can be more problematic, cause more deaths, cause more. Now, the percentage might not be the same, but it starts to happen, and over time it happens more and more. Then we start to see staphylococcus taking over as a problem. Then we see Haemophilus influenza B, and then they make a vaccine for Haemophilus influenza B, and it goes down. Great. Now we have Haemophilus influenza A, and we're starting to see infections and severity of infections like we've never seen before. We were great. Pertussis, okay, with this great vaccine, it's working fine. Oops, now all of a sudden we have mutant strains. There's always a consequence when you alter the microbial landscape, whether it's with an antibiotic or with a vaccine. They should both be used very judiciously. Infectious disease people will be the first to agree with me about antibiotics. The problem with vaccines is that it takes time to see how the microbial landscape shifts and how there are actually downsides. They don't see it in the beginning, and so the market just thrives. The mandates get put in, gets put in on the schedule by the public health department, and nobody ever wants to look back. But we have to look back. We are obligated to look back, given what's happened to the childhood population and humanity in general. The science is far from settled.
So look back, and what do we find? What do we find when we look back? What are you looking for?
If you just look, I'm just going to give you one example, which I talk about fairly frequently. When they invented the measles vaccine, and it was released in the United States in 1963, they were sure that it mimicked the actual infection, and that you would have one vaccine and you would be immune for life, and that they would eradicate measles from America by 1967.
This is in your book, Rising from the Dead. This is incredible. Yeah.
And now, 1989, what happens? We've got 25,000 cases of measles in the United States per year, so they add another vaccine. Now look at us today. We've got problems in China with viral vaccine escape. The vaccine is actually creating mutants. that they never anticipated. The experts are saying this vaccine cannot eradicate measles. It's flawed. We need a new vaccine. Well, now what's the answer? I'm supposed to get a vaccine now at the age of 53, and then probably again when I'm 70 or 80, get another one because they want to eradicate something with a tool that won't ever eradicate it. So what the solution is not to ever look back and say, wait a minute, maybe we made a mistake here. Maybe we need to think about bringing this virus back into humanity. Maybe we need to do it systematically. Maybe there's a way where we can get back to where we were when we had actual herd immunity in the people that mattered the most. But I don't predict that's going to happen in my lifetime.
It's fascinating. And if we did that, we have to get back to those protocols of good diet, of looking after ourselves, of making sure our own immunity is really strong so that we can ward off these ills ourselves.
Well, I think we need to do that now more than ever.
Absolutely.
Because we have a different kind. We have better nourished children that are wrongly nourished and that are, have their nutrients out of skew because of various factors. So I think more than ever today, especially in the era of these microbes that can't be treated. We've got now an evolving, string of pathogens in hospitals that infectious disease doctors are pulling their hair out of. They're saying we're running out of options here. Wow. So what does that mean? Do you know what they used to do in the hospital when I worked there, when we would have a microbe we couldn't eradicate? The doctors would come along and go, just stop all the antibiotics. And I go, wait a minute. But won't the person die? No, they'll just be colonized. They won't die. It just means that we won't be able to get rid of it in them. Wait a minute. They're not going to die? Then why have we been going crazy trying to get this out of them? So in Norway, they did the same thing. They just stopped using antibiotics unless it was a life-threatening situation. And their microbial resistance levels actually went down. So it is something we need to do. We need to start backpedaling away from this whole paradigm of throwing more drugs when we have a problem that the drugs caused.
It's terrific hearing you speak. At home, do you grow your own vegetables? Are you into, the healthy, organic lifestyle? Are you living all of the things you advocate? It's a beautiful place to start. Start with a garden.
Absolutely.
Start with healthy soil.
You've
Start
got to
with
have some animals too. You've got to, I think if you can have chickens and hens and that's part of your microbiome, I'm always healthier when I live in a place that's got animals outside, not just a dog.
There's so much I'd love to cover. There's a beautiful
we'll do it
chapter.
Another time. Yes.
There's a beautiful chapter on the microbiome in Rising from the Dead.
Yeah.
Much of what we've covered and much more in the book Rising from the Dead. Terrific.
Thank you. Finish on the bottom.